Okay, so I'm working on my book, How Truth Makes Us Free. And I'm to the point where I'm really diving into the natural law, and I've been really seeing God's hand in guiding how I can write some of the things so that the average person is going to care. Like, I want people to care about the natural law and understand its connection to conscience and all these other things. So one thing led to another, and I ended up in this Revenge of Conscience article with by Budziszewski, I think that's how you say it. And he's talking about, okay, well, the conscience is what clues us into the natural law and helps us guide our lives. And why are we tanking as a civilization? Why are we getting further and further away from these laws? If they're written on our hearts and we know what they are, why are we getting further and further from them? And it's either because we don't actually intuitively know them or because we're suppressing them. And so I'm sitting there thinking about, okay, we're suppressing what we know because he calls it what we can't not know. So we know what's right and what's wrong, but we're suppressing our consciences. And then I realized, oh, how are we suppressing our consciences? How are we suppressing the natural moral law? Well, we're doing that by losing the liberal arts and by ignoring history, by removing the Bible from schools. Because why? Because these are the sources of the natural law. So what happens is that we have this little bit of truth written on our hearts. We come knowing that and able to recognize that killing is wrong and we can defend our stuff and we have natural rights and we know some of these things. And then we get into society, and the society has an impact on us wherever it's at on its moral compass and whether it's holding up the natural law or not. But the tools that enable us to sculpt and educate our conscience lie in these greatest works that have ever been written. That's why they are timeless, because they make us virtuous by helping us to educate our own consciences so that we can live closer and closer in line with what is good and true and beautiful. And these great works that have stood the test of time for thousands and thousands of years have lasted for centuries because they contain the greatest truth and goodness and beauty. And when we interact with them over and over and over again, we are continually coming into contact with the divine. And so religion is like kind of the last stay in our culture, right? Like it's still the place where people are still getting some of this. And if they hold to it, the more time they spend, listening to the best, most beautiful, most true, most good things that have ever been written down or said or created, then it ennobles them, right? It ennobles us, it lifts us, it raises us to a higher level. It draws us into virtue. It makes us, all the greats from time immemorial have said that education should be to help us like the things we're supposed to like and not like the things we're not supposed to like. And what they mean by that is that we will be drawn into virtue. We will become acquainted with the good and the true and the beautiful, and we will want to spend time in those things and spend time with those things because they're the highest expression of being human. That is what other creatures cannot do, cannot be. They cannot use their reason and navigate their intuition and listen to their consciences and educate their consciences to the point where they become more and more good and true and beautiful, more and more virtuous. And so, I've grieved for a long time that we lost the liberal arts in our culture, that there are a few mainstays out there. There are a few colleges that are still trying to toe that line. And that's why the classical education is so huge in the homeschooling community, because so many people have recognized how vital it is, and they're trying to restore it and bring it back and make it available to the next generation. Because I felt when I came across Plato and the greats and I started reading the greatest things that had ever been written, I felt like I'd been robbed. But now I see that on an even deeper level, you just cannot appreciate how it is making you more good and true and beautiful. I love Tale of Two Cities, for example, and it is a story that is so full of what's good and true and beautiful in the world. And every time I interact with it, it nurtures my soul. It sculpts my character. It educates my conscience. it makes me a little bit more of a true, full human being, a little bit more of what I can become. And that is why the forces that be, you know, that don't love what's good and true and beautiful, that want to behave however they want to behave, that want to do whatever they feel like doing, are suppressing the conscience, suppressing the societal conscience. And each new generation is born into this social conscience that's been dumbed down and dumbed down and dumbed down. That's why I try to help people as soon as possible. In the starter kit of my website has the concept that Stephen Covey taught me about the divine conscience and the social conscience, because the divine conscience is what we're born with. It comes as hardware, and it draws us to what's good, and it makes us want to be better. But the social conscience and the divine conscience interact, and the social conscience can have a huge impact on the divine conscience. And so if you're spending most of your time in society, then your moral framework is just going to be by default whatever the moral framework of your society is. And if that society has been suppressing the conscience, if it's been removing the natural law sources from its systems and its institutions, then you're not going to interact with it. You're not going to have access to it. In fact, you might be completely ignorant of it. You might not even know that those things are available to you, just like I didn't even know, as ignorant as I was at 25 or whatever I was, to not even know that we still have the writings of Plato, and to feel that I was robbed because I never read those through 15 years of standardized education and went to a great university and never read Plato. And I couldn't believe that I hadn't had access to those greatest works. You know, one of the things that totally changed my life was when my senior year, my high school teacher had us read Brothers Karamazov. I did not know books like that existed. It was so rich. It interacted with the things that I intuitively felt to be the very most important ideas in the world. And he had things to say about them, and he took me on a logical journey through them, and he made me want to be better, and it instigated conversations that I could have with myself and with God and with Scripture and with other people in my real life, and it spoke to how to live, not just like some static bit of history of this thing happened at this time and place and why should I even care. Like, it spoke to me, to what was best inside of me. And only Scripture really had ever done that in my life up to that point. And it's so amazing. And I just have never, this is just a new layer of understanding. Of course, I've known for a long time, as I started reading, Plato and Aristotle and the greats all the way through, I understood that, education was supposed to make us virtuous. That's what its role was, because that made us fully human, and that made us the best that we could be. But I didn't really understand or see it quite this way, that it's sculpting my character. It's because it's nurturing my soul, because it's educating my conscience. Like, that's what I'm doing when I interact with anything that's good or true or beautiful. And it elevates me. And that is why that's why our culture is declining so quickly, because we're suppressing our moral conscience. We're suppressing our societal conscience, the social conscience, by removing the things that remind us, removing the things that educate our own individual consciences and give us the armor to correct the social conscience and to bring it into line with the true moral law, and to elevate it to what it ought to be. Because that's how we do that. That's how we arm ourselves. That's how we have the internal power. That's how we know. We don't just intuit or suspect. We know, and we stand on the shoulders of greats, because we make those connections and we see those truths, those first principles and those principles, and we do the work to align, to check in with Scripture, and to check in with our conscience, and to check in with the fruits and all the, the tools that I've been building out for 20 years and teaching people. And, these thousands of people that have been through, teens and moms and others who have done my programs through the years, they just feel so much more confident, and they feel empowered. And this is because they have been introduced to a way of living that that mirrors what they've been trying to do religiously, and shows them that even a quote secular or someone who isn't even sure how they feel about God can still move toward virtue, can still recognize the good and the true and the beautiful. They can build these bridges through the natural law, and we can elevate our culture. We can bring it back in line with what it needs to be by bringing back these sources that remind us, that teach us, and we bring back those conversations. This is why, I knew that it was written into our Declaration of Independence, and I knew that people at the time of the founding of America were having conversations. The concept of natural law was very normal to them. That's why when they read the Declaration, it made absolute sense to them that we intuitively know some things to be true, and that we have a God who's written that on our hearts, and that we can stand confidently on that truth, that there are first principles and principles that can guide our lives, and that those were going to be the foundation of this new nation. And those conversations were able to happen because our institutions had baked in the sources that were educating the conscience of the individuals. And those conversations were happening in our school systems and in our churches and on the street and at the pub. They were talking about the things that were most important. I mean, go back and read Common Sense, for heaven's sake. Like, if you want, or the Fed papers, they were published in the local newspaper. The kinds of things that the average person could read, that the farmer could read and talk to their neighbor about. It was just astronomically more deep and beautiful and good and true than almost anything that our culture is producing now. And that's why they could build out that declaration and launch that Constitution. And we all know that there were still those who were fighting for slavery, even though there was still half the country that was fighting against it. And that it had to correct itself. And why could it correct itself? Why did we have a war 80 years later to correct it? Because those institutions continued to have those conversations. There's a guy, I can't remember his name right now. And he was a Quaker. And he knew that the moral law, he followed in the footsteps of William Wilberforce, who, if you've not read Amazing Grace or seen the movie, go do it, because he knew that slavery was wrong, and that had never been a conversation. Anyway, just all of this truth coming together, and the culmination of it through printing our books. And so Wilberforce eradicates it over, in England, and his team and his group, and then they do all these incredible good works, and then I can't remember this man's name, and he's a Quaker, and he knows how wrong it is, and God speaks to him, and he turns his life over to God, and for his entire lifetime he goes up and down the eastern coast talking to groups of Quakers, showing them in the sources that they believed in the text that they had in common, in the Bible, but also in all these great works and texts throughout history, and helping to reason with them and to walk them through the arguments. And because he did that, then they relinquished. They were the first to say slavery is wrong and we stand against it, in America. And this is what it can be done. But like C.S. Lewis says, you have to work from within the moral framework. You have to have a handle on it. You have to accept that it's real. You have to acknowledge that there's a law above you. You have to embrace it and be striving to live it, so that you can work out the pieces of it that we haven't still arrived at, that we aren't living yet, that we aren't in harmony with. But we can only elevate ourselves to that level if we get the basics right, and we embrace it, and we bake it back into our systems and our institutions, and we strive to honor it and to live up to it. And then we can continue to understand it and rise to the full level of what it can be, and how it can make us all good and true and beautiful, and make all of us free, because the level of freedom that we have now is in direct relationship to the fact that we were striving to live up to it in the past in the first place. But I just had to share this with you today. I'm going to go try to write it as I'm beginning to understand it, and keep digging into these sources so that I can get this book out as soon as possible. I'll keep sharing insights I have along the journey with you. And and trying to share with you the insights that have been so illuminating for me, have made my life so much better, have helped me to become a much better woman than I used to be. And I feel so much passion about how vital it is that our culture re-embrace this. And I just can't say enough about why it's so important. And this is just another reason, another vital reason why we've got to understand it as a people and embrace it and strive to live up to it so that we can correct our social conscience, correct our institutions and our perceptions of reality, and align them with what is really real and what is really true, because that is the pathway forward for us each individually. That is how truth makes us free. It transforms us. We embrace those principles, we practice them, and they liberate us from what's holding us back in so many, many ways. But anyway, please go, if you've not, if you don't understand the natural law, go watch some of my YouTube videos, or go get the starter kit, or you could read the first couple chapters of the Mission Driven Life book that I wrote, or whatever, but just go learn more about the natural law. I don't care how you go about it, but it is so vital. So anyway, thanks for listening to my rant. I'll share more later.